The Siege of Lucknow was the prolonged defense of the Residency within the city of Lucknow during the Indian Rebellion of 1857. After two successive relief attempts had reached the city, the defenders and civilians were evacuated from the Residency, which was then abandoned. Background to the siege. The state of Awadh had been annexed by the British East India Company, and the Nawab Wajid Ali Shah was exiled to Calcutta the year before the rebellion broke out. This high-handed action by the East India Company was greatly resented within the state and elsewhere in India. The first British commissioner appointed to the newly acquired territory was Coverley Jackson. He behaved tactlessly, and Sir Henry Lawrence, a very experienced administrator, took up the appointment only 6 weeks before the rebellion broke out. The sepoys of the East India Company's Bengal Presidency Army had become increasingly troubled over the preceding years, feeling that their religion and customs were under threat from the rationalizing and evangelizing activities of the company. Lawrence was well aware of the rebellious mood of the Indian troops under his command. On the 18th of April, he warned the Governor-General, Lord Canning, of some of the manifestations of discontent, and asked permission to transfer certain rebellious corps to another province. The flashpoint of the rebellion was the introduction of the Enfield rifle. The cartridges for this weapon were believed to be greased with a mixture of beef and pork fat, which was felt would defile both Hindu and Muslim Indian soldiers. On the 1st of May, the 7th Oudh Irregular Infantry refused to bite the cartridge, and on the 3rd of May they were disarmed by other regiments. On the 10th of May, the Indian soldiers at Meerut broke into open rebellion, and marched on Delhi. When news of this reached Lucknow, Lawrence recognized the gravity of the crisis and summoned from their homes 2 sets of pensioners, one of sepoys and one of artillerymen, to whose loyalty, and to that of the Sikh and some Hindu sepoys, the successful defense of the Residency was largely due. Rebellion begins. On the 23rd of May, Lawrence began fortifying the Residency and laying in supplies for a siege. Large numbers of British civilians made their way there from outlying districts. On the 30th of May, most of the Oudh and Bengal troops at Lucknow broke into open rebellion. In addition to his locally recruited pensioners, Lawrence also had the bulk of the British 32nd Regiment of Foot available, and they were able to drive the rebels away from the city. On the 4th of June, there was a rebellion at Sitapur, a large and important station 51 miles from Lucknow. This was followed by another at Faizabad, one of the most important cities in the province, and outbreaks at Dayabad, Sultanpur and Salon. Thus, in the course of 10 days, British authority in Oudh practically vanished. On the 30th of June, Lawrence learned that the rebels were gathering north of Lucknow and ordered a reconnaissance in force. Despite the available intelligence being of poor quality, although he had comparatively little military experience, Lawrence led the expedition himself. The expedition was not very well organized. The troops were forced to march without food or adequate water during the hottest part of the day at the height of summer, and at the Chinhat they met a well-organized rebel force, with cavalry and dug-in artillery. Whilst they were under attack, some of Lawrence's sepoys and Indian artillerymen defected to the rebels, overturning their guns and cutting their traces. His exhausted British soldiers retreated in disorder. Some died of heat stroke within sight of the Residency. Lieutenant William George Cubitt, 13th Native Infantry, was awarded the Victoria Cross several years later for his act of saving the lives of 3 men of the 32nd Regiment of Foot during the retreat. His was not a unique action. Sepoys loyal to the British, especially those of the 13th Native Infantry, saved many British soldiers, even at the cost of abandoning their own wounded men, who were hacked to pieces by Indian sepoys. As a result of the defeat, the outside turreted building, Makchabawin, which contained 200 barrels of gunpowder and a large supply of ball cartridge, was blown up and the detachment withdrew to the Residency. Initial attacks. Lawrence retreated into the Residency, where the siege now began, with the Residency as the center of the defenses. The actual defended line was based on 6 detached smaller buildings and 4 entrenched batteries. The position covered some 60 acres of ground, and the garrison was too small to defend it effectively against a properly prepared and supported attack. Also, the Residency lay in the midst of several palaces, mosques and administrative buildings, as Lucknow had been the royal capital of Oudh for many years. Lawrence initially refused permission for these to be demolished, urging his engineers to spare the holy places. During the siege, they provided good vantage points and cover for rebel sharpshooters and artillery. One of the first bombardments following the beginning of the siege, on the 30th of June, caused a civilian to be trapped by a falling roof. Corporal William Oxenham of the 32nd Foot saved him while under intense musket and cannon fire, and was later awarded the Victoria Cross. The first attack was repulsed on the 1st of July. The next day, Sir Henry Lawrence was fatally wounded by a shell, dying on the 4th of July. Colonel John Inglis of the 32nd Regiment took military command of the garrison. Major John Banks was appointed the acting civil commissioner by Lawrence. When Banks was killed by a sniper a short time later, Inglis assumed overall command. About 8,000 sepoys who had joined the rebellion and several hundred retainers of local landowners surrounded the Residency. They had some modern guns and also some older pieces which fired all sorts of improvised missiles. There were several determined attempts to storm the defenses during the first weeks of the siege, but the rebels lacked a unified command able to coordinate all the besieging forces. The defenders, their number constantly reduced by military action as well as disease, were able to repulse all attempts to overwhelm them. On the 5th of August an enemy mine was foiled. Counter-mining and offensive mining against 2 buildings brought successful results. Several sorties were mounted, attempting to reduce the effectiveness of the most dangerous rebel positions and to silence some of their guns. The Victoria Cross was awarded to several participants in these sorties. Captain Samuel Hill Lawrence and Private William Dowling of the 32nd Foot and Captain Robert Hope Moncrief Aitken of the 13th Native Infantry. First relief attempt. On the 16th of July, a force under Major General Henry Havelock recaptured Cawnpore, 48 miles from Lucknow. On the 20th of July, he decided to attempt to relieve Lucknow, but it took 6 days to ferry his force of 1,500 men across the Ganges River. On the 29th of July, Havelock won a battle at Unao, but casualties, disease and heat stroke reduced his force to 850 effectives, and he fell back. Havelock managed to get a spy through to the Residency, telling him that 2 rockets would be fired at a certain time on the night where the relief force was ready to attack. There followed a sharp exchange of letters between Havelock and the insolent Brigadier James Neal, who was left in charge at Cawnpore. Havelock eventually received 257 reinforcements and some more guns, and tried again to advance. He won another victory near Unao on the 4th of August, but was once again too weak to continue the advance, and retired. Havelock intended to remain on the north bank of the Ganges, inside Oudh, and thereby prevent the large force of rebels which had been facing him from joining the siege of the Residency. But on the 11th of August, Neal reported that Cawnpore was threatened. To allow himself to retreat without being attacked from behind, Havelock marched again to Unao and won a 3rd victory there. He then fell back across the Ganges, and destroyed the newly completed bridge. On the 16th of August, he defeated a rebel force at Bitha, disposing of the threat to Cawnpore. Havelock's retreat was tactically necessary, but caused the rebellion in Oudh to become a national revolt, as previously uncommitted landowners joined the rebels. First relief of Lucknow. Havelock had been superseded in command by Major General Sir James Outram. Before Outram arrived at Cawnpore, Havelock made preparations for another relief attempt. He had earlier sent a letter to Inglis in the Residency, suggesting he cut his way out and make for Cawnpore. Inglis replied that he had too few effective troops and too many sick, wounded and non-combatants to make such an attempt. He also pleaded for urgent assistance. The rebels meanwhile continued to shell the garrison in the Residency, and also dug mines beneath the defences, which destroyed several posts. Although the garrison kept the rebels at a distance with sorties and counter-attacks, they were becoming weaker and food was running short. Outram arrived at Cawnpore with reinforcements on the 15th of September. He allowed Havelock to command the relief force, accompanying it nominally as a volunteer until Lucknow was reached. The force numbered 3,179 and was composed of 6 British and 1 Sikh infantry battalions, with 3 artillery batteries, but only 168 volunteer cavalry. They were divided into 2 brigades, under Neil and Colonel Hamilton of the 78th Highlanders. The advance resumed on the 18th of September. This time, the rebels did not make any serious stand in the open country, even failing to destroy some vital bridges. On the 23rd of September, Havelock's force drove the rebels from the Alimbar, a walled park 4 miles south of the Residency. Leaving the baggage with a small force in the Alimbar, he began the final advance on the 25th of September. Because of the monsoon rains, much of the open ground around the city was flooded or waterlogged, preventing the British making any outflanking moves and forcing them to make a direct advance through part of the city. The force met heavy resistance trying to cross the Chaba Canal, but succeeded after 9 out of 10 men of a forlorn hope were killed storming a bridge. They then turned to their right, following the west bank of the canal. The 78th Highlanders took a wrong turning, but were able to capture a rebel battery near the Kai Saba Palace, before finding their way back to the main force. After further heavy fighting, by nightfall the force had reached the Makshabarwin. Outram proposed to halt and contact the defenders of the Residency by tunnelling and mining through the intervening buildings, but Havelock insisted on an immediate advance. The advance was made through heavily defended narrow lanes. Neil was one of those killed by rebel musket fire. In all, the relief force lost 535 men out of 2,000, incurred mainly in this last rush. By the time of the relief, the defenders of the Residency had endured a siege of 87 days, and were reduced to 982 fighting personnel. Second siege. Originally, Outram had intended to evacuate the Residency, but the heavy casualties incurred during the final advance made it impossible to remove all the sick and wounded and non-combatants. Another factor which influenced Outram's decision to remain in Lucknow was the discovery of a large stock of supplies beneath the Residency, sufficient to maintain the garrison for 2 months. Lawrence had laid in the stores, but died before he had informed any of his subordinates. Instead, the defended area was enlarged. Under Outram's overall command, Inglis took charge of the original Residency area, and Havelock occupied and defended the palaces and other buildings east of it. Outram had hoped that the relief would also demoralize the rebels, but was disappointed. For the next 6 weeks, the rebels continued to subject the defenders to musket and artillery fire, and dug a series of mines beneath them. The defenders replied with sorties, as before, and dug countermines. 21 shafts were sunk and 3,291 feet of gallery were constructed by the defenders. The enemy dug 20 mines, 3 caused loss of life, 2 did no injury, 7 were blown in and 7 were tunneled into and their galleries taken over. The defenders were able to send messengers to and from the Alimbar, from where in turn messengers could reach Cawnpore. A volunteer civil servant, Thomas Henry Kavanagh, the son of a British soldier, disguised himself as a sepoy and ventured from the Residency aided by a local man named Kainan Jalal. He and his scout crossed the entrenchments east of the city and reached the Alimbar to act as a guide to the next relief attempt. For this action, Kavanagh was awarded the Victoria Cross and was the first civilian in British history to be honoured with such an award for action during a military conflict. Preparations for second relief. The rebellion had involved a very wide stretch of territory in northern India. Large numbers of rebels had flocked to Delhi, where they proclaimed the restoration of the Mughal Empire under Bahadur Shah II. A British army besieged the city from the first week in June. On the 10th of September, they launched a storming attempt, and by the 21st of September they had captured the city. On the 24th of September, a column of 2,790 British, Sikh and Punjabi troops under Colonel Greaves of the 8th Regiment of Foot marched through the Lahore Gate to restore British rule from Delhi to Cawnpur. On the 9th of October, Greaves received urgent calls for help from a British garrison in the Red Fort at Agra. He diverted his force to Agra, to find the rebels had apparently retreated. While his force rested, they were surprised and attacked by the rebel force, which had been close by. Nevertheless, they rallied, defeated and dispersed the rebel force. This Battle of Agra cleared all organized rebel forces from the area between Delhi and Cawnpur, although guerrilla bands remained. Shortly afterwards, Greaves received reinforcements from Delhi, and was superseded in command by Major General James Hope Grant. Grant reached Cawnpur late in October, where he received orders from the new Commander-in-Chief in India, Sir Colin Campbell, to proceed to the Alimbar, and transport the sick and wounded to Cawnpur. He was also strictly enjoined not to commit himself to any relief of Lucknow until Campbell himself arrived. Campbell was 64 years old when he left England in July 1857 to assume command of the Bengal Army. By mid-August, he was in Calcutta, preparing his departure up country. It was late October before all preparations were completed. Fighting his way up the Grand Trunk Road, Campbell arrived in Cawnpur on the 3rd of November. The rebels held effective control of large parts of the countryside. Campbell considered, but rejected, securing the countryside before launching his relief of Lucknow. The massacre of British women and children following the capitulation of Cawnpur was still in recent memory. In British eyes, Lucknow had become a symbol of their resolve. Accordingly, Campbell left 1,100 troops in Cawnpur for its defence, leading 600 cavalry, 3,500 infantry and 42 guns to the Alimbar. In what Samuel Smiles described as an example of the women and children first protocol being applied, British warships were dispatched from Hong Kong to Calcutta. The Marines and sailors of the Shannon, Pearl and Sanspareil formed a naval brigade with the ship's guns and fought their way from Calcutta until they met up with Campbell's force. The strength of the rebels investing Lucknow has been widely estimated from 30,000 to 60,000. They were amply equipped, the sepoy regiments among them were well trained, and they had improved their defences in response to Havelock's and Outram's first relief of the Residency. The Charbagh Bridge used by Havelock and Outram, just north of the Alimbar, had been fortified. The Charbagh Canal from the Dilkusha Bridge to the Charbagh Bridge was dammed and flooded to prevent troops or heavy guns fording it. Cannon emplaced in entrenchments north of the Gumti River not only daily bombarded the besieged Residency, but also enfiladed the only viable relief path. However, the lack of a unified command structure among the sepoys diminished the value of their superior numbers and strategic positions.